So another thing that we're going to do is look at writing claims from data. So Hillocks actually argues that you should try to set up situations where students are not writing claims just based on what they think, but where they examine data first and then come up with claims based on that data. And this is a part of argument using evidence, so figuring out when you have evidence how to actually use it and how to use it to formulate a specific claim. So he has this process for doing that. So the first step in the process is to examine the data or evidence and then ask questions that are based on that data. And it's this, you don't want to ask necessarily questions about the data, like where it came from or what perspective it represents or how many people were asked. That would be to focus on a different skill, like if you're evaluating sources. But if you're just focusing on claims, you want to think about questions based on what you see there. Then you re-examine the data based on those questions and try to answer, which the answer to one or more of the questions would become potential claim or claims. And you would want to test that using PMI or FAI. So we're going to practice this with some visual data, something that students definitely need to be taught how to read. So you kind of get a twofer going here. You're helping them examine data and write claims. You're also taking them through the process of analyzing visual data to write claims. So you'll take a look at the handout that these ladies gave you. This is a breakdown of where money goes, where people from the United States spend what they spend their money on. So what the first step in this process is just to kind of look at this, to read it, look at what's there, and then there's space around the outside of it for you to write questions based on the data. So what are you wondering based on that data? So for example, after I looked through this, one thing that I was really drawn to, which probably won't be a surprise given my perspective, is the fact that we spend 3.8% of our income on apparel and services and 1.9% on education. So my question is, why are we spending more on things that we wear than we are on our education? And I would just write that in the margin right there next to it. So that's a question that I'm wondering as I look at this data. Another thing that I noticed, that I didn't see the first reading, but as I looked closer, under food, we spend 12.4% of our money on food, and 7% of that is on food at home. So I'm wondering where we eat and why, if we're spending that much time, almost half outside of the home. So those are just a couple of examples, questions I'm wondering about. So go ahead and take a few minutes, and you can talk about this if you want to, or work through it on your own. Try to jot down a few questions that you're wondering based on the data. So pick out something that stands out to you.
What you spend on education?
Do they consider taxes in the spending here?
There's not taxes on here.
Okay, so that money is not.
No. It's not government. Because it's not government.
If our biggest cost is housing, how can we house ourselves more efficiently? Is there a correlation between the amount of money a family spends on education and the amount they spend on reading? Between entertainment and eating out, we spend 10% of our income. Why? What could we save by buying repurposed apparel? So those were the questions I had written for myself.
What are you wondering as you look at this data?
This isn't one person, this is 2.5 people.
Yeah.
I am wondering about the reading versus the entertainment. Because in my household,
So put that into a question first.
okay, I am wondering why the average person does not consider reading as entertainment.
Okay. Great. John had mentioned there's no spot on here for money to be saved. But there's
Your cash contributions
How people
are
save.
considered savings.
or if it's categorized somewhere else, what is that?
Contributing to the savings account.
Okay, good. So now we have a list of questions. So this data, you examine this data, this evidence, you've thought about it. There's some things that you're wondering. So the next step is to choose one of these questions, what I'd like you to do at your tables is pick one, re-examine the data. So look at it with that question in mind and see if you can come up with a claim based on this data. So a claim about people from the United States, about consumers, about what we value. So something along those lines, using the question as a guideline. It's going to take just a few minutes. Pick one as a group, look at the data again, and see if you can formulate it.
So which of those questions can we turn into a claim?
People don't save in America.
People spend. Well, it's not clear. We don't have that data because we know the income before taxes and we know how much they're spending, but we don't know how much is going to tax them and how much is going to save.
What about, we don't make enough to live on based on their tax?
We always kind of live above our.
We live outside our means.
We're racking up debt and not savings.
I know taxes are.
So we're not going to use the questions up there, is that what we're saying? We can't turn
It's
any
a
of those
claim.
questions into a claim?
Well, we're looking about savings, I said nothing about savings.
Right.
And the claim, the fact that there's nothing about savings might indicate that we as Americans are spenders, not savers.
That would make 11 Americans are spenders, not savers. Okay, so that's just in
Yeah, that's good.
We took the question, why is there nothing about savings? And we said, okay, Americans are spenders, not savers. Great. Other claims? Americans value entertainment more than education. One more.
They didn't have my health care bill like 2 years ago, so that average, I'm not sure where they did that.
So then the next step would be, we've got some claims we formulated based on this data. You would want to test it. You want students to test that then. So either together in groups, with partners, for, against, interesting, revising if necessary, and then maybe, hopefully, if the data is interesting enough, they would feel compelled to look beyond this and see if there, what else they can find about that particular claim from other resources. What's missing here? Because obviously, any source doesn't capture everything, especially if it's a visual source. It offers one perspective. You might want to move into looking other places. So the idea is it's really important early on to take them through this process and also to provide them with the data source itself. Because you're focusing on having them read data, not necessarily going and trying to find it. So I have another source I'm going to give to you, which is funny that I planned for this without Paul and I just totally fleshing out the two different parts of the different presentations. But we're not going to take time to go through this, but I had to share this visual piece of data with you. I think it would be for students, great for students to look at, especially if you're talking at the secondary level. So it's a correlation between world events and zombie movies. So what was released and how many were released related to different events like war and other things. So if we had time, I'd have you go through now with that particular source and not so much guidance. So going back to this process, you've got a piece of data in front of you. Now go through, examine the data, ask questions based on that data, re-examine it, and try to answer the question, and then to test your claim. So just go ahead and give you that source. But I have one more strategy that I want to share with you. Thank you. Paula, can I get the thing with you? So I passed out, this is Harper's Index. I love using Harper's Index for helping students analyze evidence and to start to sift through a lot more evidence. And this would come after reading those grasp the visual text, because now we're going to look at written data that's still relatively short and simple, but there's more that they're going to be working through, which is just like eventually what they'll be doing if they're doing research and looking at a lot of different sources. So Harper's Index, which is easy, you can get these really easily. They come out in Harper's Weekly, so if you just search Harper's Index, you get the one for that week that pops up that you can print as a PDF like this one here. So what I'd like you to do is take just a few minutes, and I can see most of you are already reading. So as you read through this data, I want you to choose on your own 2 to 3 pieces of data or pairs of data, because some of them are very clearly paired together. So some of them are isolated, others are meant to be read together. So 2 or 3 pieces that stand out to you, and as you then look back at those and jot down a couple of questions that you're wondering about when you look at that data. So the 2 or 3 pieces that you've chosen. Many of you are already there, so if you haven't read the whole list, that's okay, but go ahead and just talk a little bit at your table about what you noticed, what you're thinking about this data. I have to say, if you didn't get through the list, I think the last pair, it just blows my mind, and I could think a lot about that. So the number of plowshare tortoises found in a suitcase at a Thai airport in March, 54. Estimated world population of plowshare tortoises, 400. So I've got all kinds of questions in my mind when I read those 2 pieces of data together. So talk a little bit, about 3 or 4 minutes. What did you notice? What are you thinking? What data stood out to you? What kind of questions do you have as we look over this?
Like the idea of omission, you know, like what's being left out, you know, like that's always really important.
So at this point in the process, if I have
Without paying taxes.
So if I've taken through, and remember that at this point in my instructional sequence, I'm not really front-loading. I'm focusing on particular skills with students. We've done a lot of oral practice with claims and evidence and analysis, and even a lot of that was part of this lesson. But I had a really focused, I had 2 goals for what we did here. I wanted to help you create claims, and I wanted to help you use evidence. So I want to do something here to measure whether or not that's been successful, to figure out where I would go next. And I think that it would be a good time, now that we've talked a lot, I want to see what happens in writing, and if you can transition that to writing before I move on to the next thing, which would probably be to focus on warrant and explanation or analysis. So remember, we want to give students multiple opportunities to show what they know, and for us to measure whether or not they know something. But we also don't want to make our lives incredibly overwhelmed with grading, right? So I don't want you to sit down and write a full essay at this point, but I want you to use this data in a way that's kind of a mini, and I love more and more, I'm having students write mini essays so that are easy and quick to grade and assess, and to see if you get what I want you to get, and also if you're ready for where I want to go next. So we're going to take just a few minutes, and I want you to write a mini essay based on something from Harper's Index. And I would like you to include, so you only get 4 sentences, is that it? You can't write more than 4. Only 4, so think hard about what's going to go in each one. But please include a defensible, arguable claim, include data or evidence from Harper's Index, and see if you can write a warrant and explanation of how your evidence proves your claim. Most students can write a defensible, arguable claim, and if they can choose relevant evidence that's related to that claim, I can see the connection there. If so, then I'm ready to move on to my plan for the next step in the instructional sequence, which would be to help students take them through activities to help them write warrants and explanations. So that's why the second part of the 4-sentence essay is a pre-assessment for where I'm headed next, to figure out if students are ready for that, or if they've mastered it, which probably isn't the case. I don't suspect that's the case, but I want to make sure if they have. And also to look and see if they don't know if they haven't mastered the claims and the data evidence, then we need to do some more work with that tomorrow. With looking at these, revising them, with practicing more with the FAI process. And like I said, I take these home, and I can give students a lot of feedback on 4 sentences really quickly. And there's a really good chance I could get it back to them the next day for my instruction or for whatever I want to do in the next steps in the process. So sometimes I'll do 2 sentences, sometimes 3, and you know, just kind of figuring out what exactly I'm looking for and what's the bare minimum that they could show me evidence of that.